Hey class, in this video I'm going to be doing a quick intro to audio. So we're going to start a new section in week 4. Week 4 is going to start on a Tuesday because we have a holiday on Monday, so I'll post these videos on Tuesday. And so in this video I'm just going to talk about the general section, this unit on audio. And the assignment that we're going to be working on, and some basic principles of sound and audio. In the next video, I'll go over recording and editing a little bit, and then I'll also talk about how to find and download Creative Commons and public domain audio sources from the internet. So for now, we're just going to take a quick look at the schedule, and then I'll go over some terms and show you guys some basics of how audio and digital audio works. And I think you'll see there's a lot of similarities with what we covered with images in terms of the way we think about data and capturing audio and converting it into a digital format and editing and things like that, having an edit file and an export file. There's a lot of similarities between editing audio and editing images. So I hope you'll see those similarities kind of come through as we're taking a look at it. Anyway, let's get started. I'm going to make myself smaller down here, and let's take a look at the schedule and then the assignment for this project. So we're starting today just talking about audio. We'll do a demo on audio recording and editing. And I don't have it here, but I'm also going to do another short demo on downloading audio onto your computer. We will do a quick blog post, weekly blog post, where you just post a recording and just kind of show the progress that you're working on. Next week, we'll go over audio filters. And so we'll look at different ways to add effects and filters to audio and how that changes the way that the audio sounds. And we'll start to kind of edit together our audio piece. And then in week 6, we'll talk about audio layering and mixing, and then editing and exporting and submitting your final audio project. So that's the basic schedule. So we've got 3 weeks on audio, just like in our image section. We just had 3 quick weeks to introduce some basic concepts and learn how to use a few things, but the overall thing is going to be pretty fast. So we're just doing a quick dive into audio. We're going to do a really simple project, and then we're going to keep going. So let's take a look at our audio section in the topics page. So to get started with audio, the first thing you're going to want to do is download this program called Audacity. Audacity is a free program that you can download on Mac or Windows, and you can edit and record audio and do different stuff for free. And it's actually a really nice program. It's used a lot for podcasts. It's not a full audio editing suite, so you wouldn't want to use it for like a film or for music or other things like that. But it's really good for simple projects, for podcasts, for things that you just want to edit some basic audio together. So we'll take a look at that in a moment. I'll post these videos here. There's a couple tutorials for recording audio from your phone, whether you have an iPhone or an Android. So in these video demos, video demos that I'll record, I'm just going to record straight into the computer, which you're able to do for the project. But if you want, a lot of you guys have already probably used your phones to record audio. So if you want to try recording something on your phone and putting that onto the computer, there's a couple tutorials on how to do that. They may be slightly out of date, but they should be basically the same process. So you can take a look at these tutorials. That's the iPhone one, and here's one for Android. Just using the sort of default audio recording or voice memo apps. So those are there. I'm not going to go over those in the demos, but if you have questions, I'm happy to go over it with you. We're going to be looking at Audacity for this project, and I'm going to, in the next video in the demo, I'll kind of go over editing and everything like that. There's also a little GarageBand tutorial here. If you've used GarageBand, it's pretty much a similar program. It's more geared towards music, but it has a lot of the same features as Audacity. So you could go use a GarageBand. Maybe you already have some familiarity with that. There's some links here to different Creative Commons resources for downloading sound. We'll look at these in another video, but you can see There's some options there. There's some resources here, how sound works, how sound waves work. I'm going to explain a lot of this stuff in the video today, but there's some resources here if you want to kind of reinforce those concepts. Couple more recording overviews you can take a look at. And then some interesting, if you want to get a little bit more into some, audio, there's a couple podcasts, season 1 of Serial, which was a really successful, famous podcast, a 99% Invisible podcast about sound that's really, really interesting and talks about recording audio and stuff. This sound design video is also really interesting. It's a Foley artist. If you're familiar with Foley, those are people who make sound effects for films. And so a lot of sound effects in films don't actually come from shooting the film itself. It comes from post-production, where you use different ways of creating sound effects in the film. So that's a really interesting video. I recommend checking that out as well. Here's our assignment. So the premise for this assignment is to create an audio portrait of a place. And so the idea here is to try to create the sense of being in a place just through audio without any visuals. So you can record sounds from the place, you can record yourself talking about the place, you can interview people and record those interviews, and then you can mix and edit that together with other sounds that you can find on the internet or record in other places to create a sort of mixed together sound project. The final version of this audio piece should be at least 1 minute long, no longer than 3 minutes, and you should have at least 5 different sounds that you edit together. The concept should have a clear beginning, middle, and end. So it doesn't have to be, a feature film, but it should have some structure to it. So it should have a beginning, middle, and end. And we just want to kind of create a sense of a place. If you have other ideas, hopefully this idea sounds exciting to you, but if you have other things that you might want to do, just send me an email, or we could talk in office hours and we could go over it. And most likely I'll say that sounds fine if it involves the same sort of editing and same basic setup. We're going to go over the files that you need to submit, and you're going to post an Open Lab post as well. I'll go over more details of that in a couple weeks when we go over the submission for the project. So that's what we'll be working on for the next few weeks, just to give you a sense of what's coming up. But for now, let's just talk about some of the basic concepts of sound. So I'm going to go over a few sort of important terms for editing sound, so that we understand what we're looking at and we understand how people think about sound and edit digital sound. So let's see. So you don't need to use Audacity for this video. I'm going to open Audacity just to kind of show some examples of sound. If you want to follow along, you can download Audacity. So just click on the download Audacity and then choose either Windows or Mac. If you're on Windows like me, there's a couple options. One is that you can download an installer. I don't recommend using this first one. I'm not actually honestly totally sure what that is, but I think it's going to make you create an account and do other things. The 64-bit installer is kind of the classic way to do Audacity. If you download that, it'll show up as like a little exe in your downloads folder, which you can then throw into your program files or wherever you want. You can also just download a zip file that has the application in it. That's what I have on my computer. So that's what I'm going to open now. But it's really up to you how you want to do it. So if you want to follow along, you don't need to, but if you want to follow along, you can download Audacity. For now, I'm just going to be talking about how sound works. So some of the stuff I'll show uses Audacity to demonstrate what we're going to be looking at. But I'm not going over editing or other techniques that we're going to go over in our next video. Okay, so when you open up Audacity, this is what it's going to look like. It's very bare bones audio editing software. If you've used things like GarageBand or Ableton Live or Pro Tools, any sound editing, Fruity Loops, anything like that, those are more fully featured software for making music or doing different things. Audacity is not that. Audacity is a very bare bones, simple audio editing tool for doing just simple basic editing for for podcasts, for simple audio projects and things like that. I use it a ton for preparing assets for animations that I'm working on, or video game sound effects that I'm working on. When you just want to get a sound, do a quick edit, and then export it, Audacity is really, really useful for that. If you want to do more fully featured stuff like music or editing for film or things like that, there's better programs to use for those things. But Audacity is a good way to kind of cover some of the basics. So when you open Audacity for the first time, you may see some pop-ups and stuff like that, but eventually you'll get to what we see here, this interface. I'll go over a little bit more of the details of the interface in the next video. But I'm just going to record some audio right now. I have this little USB microphone here that I use for recording these videos and other stuff. And you can see in the audio setup, if I go to recording device, it's going to show the options connected to your computer. So you can see that's the microphone that I use. You could also, most computers are going to have some built-in microphones these days, especially if you're on like a laptop or something like that. You might have your own, audio device that you want to connect. I have some Bluetooth headphones in, which you could also use as your recording device. And then you can set your playback device as well. So I'm using my headphones as my playback device, and you can change the basic setup here. If you connect something after you've opened Audacity, you may need to rescan your audio devices. It'll look through stuff that's been connected, and you'll see it there. Anyway, I'm just going to record my voice for a moment. I'll maybe pretend that I'm introducing a podcast and have that be sort of my premise for the demo. That's not the premise for the assignment. It's just the premise for the demo. So you don't have to do a podcast for the assignment. So I'm just going to hit the record button and talk, and we'll see the recording appear. Hello, welcome to the BMCC podcast. That's not a very good name for a podcast. Let me try that again. I'm going to just delete this. Let's name our podcast the MMP 100 podcast. That sounds better. Hello, and welcome to the MMP 100 podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about audio. Okay, so I'll stop there. So what we see when we make this recording is called a waveform. A waveform is a representation of the recorded audio. And most of what I'm going to talk about in this video is why it looks the way it does and what it represents and how it makes it so that we can edit it. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to click on this button right here, fit project to width, to kind of stretch it out. And then we'll talk about what we're looking at. So this is a waveform. And what this shows us is just the loudness of the audio over time. So you can kind of see that the waveform has these peaks and valleys. And what we're looking at is basically just loudness. How loud is the sound relative to silence? So 0 in the middle represents silence. So the closer it is to the middle, the quieter it is. And then the louder it gets, the higher these peaks go, that's farther away from silence. So that means there's more loudness. So you can see when we play this back, as we go through the waveform, we'll see that the louder parts represent parts where I'm talking. The quieter parts represent pauses or, parts where I'm not talking as loudly. Hello, and welcome to the MMP 100 podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about audio. Okay, so let's talk about what audio is for just a moment. I'm not going to go into tons of detail in terms of the physics of audio, but I think it's good to just get a baseline on what we're looking at when we talk about audio. So a good representation of audio is, I have this video open over here, ripples on a pond. So if we look at this, what you're going to see is a rock fall into a pond, and the water goes down, and then it comes back up, and the waves sort of spread out in a circle. Let's watch that real quick. Okay, so we see all those waves spreading out. So this is sort of like a 2D representation because it's on one plane, but it's sort of like a 2D representation of how audio generally works, where imagine the same thing when I'm talking, except the ripples of sound are spreading in every direction, maybe a little bit forward, but also, going everywhere and bouncing off of stuff and filling the room with sound. So these waves, the property that we hear as sound is this displacement. Here it's happening in water, which makes it easy to see. But when we hear stuff, normally we're hearing it through air. It's a displacement of air that we interpret. We hear that displacement. We can feel it with our ears, but we interpret it and we hear it in our brains as sound. So let's watch that one more time and watch those waves start to ripple out. So what's happening there and what happens when you make a sound? Let me grab my... So we could imagine silence is just a straight line. And that's the surface of the pond. That's air when there's no disruption to it. And then when we make a sound, or we drop a rock into the water, when we make a sound, what we're doing, if you imagine clapping your hands, when you do it really fast, you're displacing a lot of air very quickly. And so the faster I clap, the louder the sound will be. And so what's happening is there's a displacement, there's a disruption in this silence. So it's like a rock dropping into the water. We can imagine here's our rock and here's the water, and it's displacing all of this water. And so right here is a bunch of air. And the water gets pressed down here, and eventually there's a force that pushes it back up. So there's going to be a force, use pink for force. There's going to be a force that pushes our rock back up. And what that does is it creates waves. So the displaced air gets pushed back up and the water gets pushed up to the side. And so that creates a little wave. And this wave keeps going because the force goes outwards. So the wave keeps going, but eventually it kind of tails off. And so different sounds have different amounts of loudness and different properties that determine the way they work. But every sound is just us hearing a displacement of air or water or some other medium. All right. So when we look at Audacity, what we're looking at is the amplitude or sort of the loudness of that sound. There's other data in there that we'll look at in a moment, but that's sort of the basic quality that we're looking at. So that's the loudness, or sometimes we call it the amplitude, how far it is from quiet. And if we zoom way, way in on our audio form, let me actually go to a louder part and zoom in here. You can see those displacements. So you can see these waves that kind of are rippling through our silence. And that gives us a visual of loudness. And this is something that makes it easy. This is what we usually edit with because it's easy to see where parts are loud and parts are quiet. And when we're editing, especially somebody talking, we don't really need to edit for frequency or pitch or other things like that. What we really just want to edit for is when are they talking, when are they not. So for example, if I was editing this as a podcast, I can see this little blip right here. And that's me making like a sound with my mouth as I start to talk. So we probably want to get rid of that. And so we would just, grab this and just hit delete on the keyboard and it's gone. And then we can see this is basically where I start talking. So if I was going to edit this, I would probably just get rid of that little beginning. So I'm going to start talking right at that big waveform. Hello and welcome to the MMP. And same thing at the end. I can see this is kind of the last thing that I say here. Audio. So this is, just a little bit of background noise. I don't really need that, so I can just take that and delete it. So that's why we use waveforms to edit audio. It just makes it really easy to see where the loud and quiet parts are, and that makes it easy to edit the audio. So that was, let's write down these terms. Just gonna delete that. So what we were just talking about there was our waveform and loudness or amplitude. And so those are a few terms that you'll hear when people talk about editing audio. Okay, so the next thing that we'll discuss is frequency. Frequency is the thing that kind of makes sounds sound higher or lower pitched. And frequency refers to how many waves there are over a certain amount of time. That's why it's called frequency. You know, when you use frequency, you talk about the frequency of how often do you do a certain thing. So in this case, frequency is how often do we make a wave in our sound. And we can demonstrate the effect of this really easily. I'm going to mute this track, and I'm going to make a new track. I'm going to make a mono track here. And in Audacity, we can generate some sounds. So I'm just going to generate a sine wave. And this will show us one very specific frequency. So if I go to generate and go to tone, I'm going to make a sine wave. And I'm going to start at the frequency 440. The range of frequency that people can hear is somewhere around like 100, maybe a little less than 100, up to about 20,000. And frequency works in kind of a weird way where we'll look at this in a second. Basically, it's not like linear where as we add, it sounds higher. It actually is when we double 440. 440 is the A note in classical Western music, and if we double that, if we go to 880, we get the octave of A. So it doubles in frequency through each octave that we perceive. So it's a little bit weird mathematically, but we don't really need to know that much about that. Anyway, I'm going to generate 1 second of a sine wave at the amplitude 0.8. And it's over here because I had my cursor over here. So let me just grab this and pull it over here. Okay, so that looks like just a big block of sound. I'm actually going to turn this down a little bit and then play it for a second. Okay, so that might sound familiar. It might sound like the test sound from a broadcast, although you may not have heard that, but maybe you've heard people reference it in movies or something like that. This just looks like a big block of sound, but if we zoom into this, we'll see exactly what 440 looks like. So 440 is 440 waves per second. So that's why we call it 440 hertz. And that's an A. That's what it sounds like when we play an A on the piano or on a synthesizer. And so you can see that waveform is just a very basic waveform, and it creates that pitch. If we take this, so I'm just going to take a little bit of this waveform. Let me make sure I'm scrolled to the beginning. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this waveform, and I'm going to go to effect, and I'm going to speed it up. So I'm going to change the speed. So I'm going to change the speed by 2 and then apply. And so you see now I have twice as many waves in this beginning section as this the rest of the section, and you'll hear what that sounds like. It's a little bit too fast, so I'm going to have to do a little bit more. So let me undo that. And let's go back here. Okay, let's zoom out a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to take this whole beginning and do the same thing. I'm going to change the speed by 2. Okay, so now you'll be able to hear it a little bit better. So it's really high at the beginning, it's an octave above, and then it drops down. And you can see that basically that's just the quality. That's what happens when we have a higher frequency. We hear it as a higher pitch. When we have a lower frequency, we hear it as a lower pitch. So that's what frequency means when you hear people talk about frequency. Let's add another term. We'll call that frequency. And when we record audio, even though we don't always see it in the waveform, we're actually recording many frequencies at the same time. So each bit of audio actually has a ton of data in it. So one way that we can see that, in our default view, we see the waveform. But in Audacity, if I go over to here, to this little menu on this track, and I go to spectrogram, this shows us all of the frequencies in the recording. And so if I zoom in a little bit on here, you can see these are basically just the frequencies of my voice as I talk. And so my voice is relatively low. You can see I have a lot of frequencies kind of in the 100 to 500 range, which is sort of in the general speaking range is somewhere between 100 and 1,000. So most of the higher frequencies, which are coded as brighter colors in the spectrogram, most of those higher frequencies you can see are in this lower area, but there are some higher frequencies in my voice that you can see up here. There's also a lot of noise. I'm in a room at BMCC where there's a heating unit, and there's people driving down the West Side Highway out the window. So there's lots of noise. So it's a very noisy signal, and you can see that. You can see all the little bits of noise throughout the spectrogram. Okay, so let's go back to our waveform for a second. We see the different frequencies that we've recorded. Oops. Okay, let's go to our waveform. So I'm going to choose a little section here, and I'm going to zoom in a lot. And eventually, when we get close enough, it might be hard to see on there, but there's these little dots. There's these little tiny dots along our waveform. Let's see if I zoom in a little bit more. Maybe you can see this. Each one, you can see that there's just these tiny little dots. And what these dots are called are samples. Samples are kind of similar to what we talked about with sampling in digital images, where we take like one pixel from each part of our photograph. Samples are the same thing because when in the real world, audio has just an infinite amount of data. We can't record that digitally. So what we do is we use samples. We record little bits of the audio at a certain rate. And then when we put that back together and play it back through the computer, it sounds pretty close to what we originally recorded. And that also has to do with the quality of the audio that we record. So that's called the sample rate. The sample rate is the number of samples of audio that we record over time. So the default for most audio is either going to be, you can see here it's 44,100 hertz. We also call that 44.1K. So that means we've recorded 44,000 samples. It's either per second or per minute. I think it's per second. Let me double check that. I always forget this. 44.1K per minute or second. Per second. Okay, that makes more sense. Anyway, so that's a lot of audio. So think about that. If you record a minute of audio, that's 60 seconds times 44,000. That's like a huge number. So we record tons and tons of tiny little samples, and we put them together and play them back through the computer, and that recreates something that sounds like the original audio. So that's the sample rate. The higher the sample rate, the more it's going to sound like the actual original audio. So 44.1 or 44,100 hertz is kind of the default for sort of middle quality audio, like an MP3 that you listen to on your computer, or a voice memo that you might leave on your phone, where it doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be good enough that you can hear the detail and different stuff. You really don't want to record below that. Anything that you record below that, it'll be really obvious that it's just a bad quality of recording. It won't sound good. 48,000 is typical of like slightly higher end music. Like if you use Spotify and you kind of have the option to listen at different levels of quality, 48,000 is a little bit better quality, but it's not as much data, so it's kind of a good compromise. For movies, when you go to the movie theater, you're going to hear 96,000 hertz. So it's almost twice, it's twice 48. It's more than twice 44. It's much more information, and so the quality of the audio is much better. When you go to a movie and you're listening to the audio and it's really loud and you can hear all the differences in the audio, then you want to have much higher quality audio, so that you don't hear kind of like digital artifacts and stuff like that. So the higher the sample rate, the better quality of audio, but also the larger file size you can get. So just like with our images, when we looked at the quality of JPEG versus PNG and stuff like that, the more data you record, the larger your file is going to be. And so we have to, when we're making digital media, we have to kind of find a compromise between having gigantic file sizes and having high quality or good quality audio. The last thing to look at is here under format is the bit depth. The bit depth is basically just like how much audio do we record per sample. So 16-bit, 24-bit, 30-bit. So 16 is just 16 bits per sample. That's not a ton of data. 24-bit is a little bit more, and 32-bit is much better. So again, it's a similar thing where the more data we record per sample, the higher our file size will be, but also the better quality our audio will be. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are the basic terms that I wanted to cover. So we have sample rate and bit depth. Those are really all the terms that I wanted to cover just in terms of this basic intro. In the next video, when we start actually editing the audio, I'll talk a little bit more about different file types and things like that once we've made some edits and we want to export our audio. So that's it for this video, and I will see you guys in the next one.